Hola amigos, welcome back to Latina Living History. I'm Katie, this is my sister Holly, and today we're going to be talking about Día de Muertos. You may have heard it called Día de los Muertos, which is pretty common in the US vernacular today. It's a back translation from what is actually called Día de Muertos in Mexico. So that's what I'm going to be calling it today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of it. Holly is going to tell you about how it's still celebrated today. And then we're going to explain what all this is. This is all new in the film set, so I hope you'll stick with us and find out what we're doing. So my focus was on the 19th century. That's generally the period that I like to portray the most and is of most interest to me. But this is a festival that actually dates back pre-conquest, so to the Aztec and Mayan cultures, and they had their own pantheon of gods that this was set up to commemorate and worship at a certain time of year. Some of my sources said it was early summer, but basically what I learned is that it didn't happen in October or November back then. That was the result of what's called syncretism, which is where you have one religion and another religion comes in and they kind of mesh. Just like most people agree, well, okay, some people agree that Jesus wasn't really born in December, but there was a holiday there for Yule, and so the two kind of smashed together, and now we have Christmas. So it's that same sort of idea. So back pre-conquest, the cultures in Mexico celebrated this differently, but you see sort of remnants of the ideas in things that they use to celebrate today and throughout the 19th century. So what is Día de Muertos? It is a holiday to commemorate the dead. And this isn't like Halloween, which it's commonly conflated with. It's a mourning / celebration holiday. So modern people in general, in the US at least, don't have any mechanisms left for continuous grieving and continuous commemoration when they lose people. And so one of the things that I really enjoyed about learning about this holiday was that this makes space for people to celebrate those that they've lost year after year after year. So the All Saints' Day came from the Catholic tradition, and Día de Muertos came from pre-conquest Mexico, and the two have kind of joined, and you'll see kind of vestigial ideas from the pre-conquest traditions, and then All Saints' Day is a Christian tradition, essentially, and the two of them together, I think, are a really neat sort of festival or holiday to think about and remember and connect with the people that we are still alive with in remembering the people that we've lost. And I know 2020 has been a really hard year for a lot of people. We're not only changing the way that we live, we're grieving not just for people, but for the life that we had and the life that we thought we were going to have. So this year, things hit me particularly hard. My last grandparent, our last grandparent, passed away during the summer, and it's been rough. And so finding out that there was this tradition and festival that was built to accommodate that was really uplifting and really fun to research. So I hope you guys find some value in this. I really did. I found it very cathartic. And I hope you will too. Hopefully I'm not going to cry. That actually happened while I was researching. So my focus in living history is primarily the 19th century. I find it the most interesting and accessible, and there's lots of events in the Midwest where we live focused on the 19th century. So that was really kind of where my research fell, but as a tradition that dates back to pre-conquest Mexico, obviously there's lots that you could get into that I did not explore. So if that interests you, I hope that you'll go take a look. And if you need help with any Spanish, feel free to let me know, because a lot of the articles that I actually found were in Spanish, which I think is cool. They're writing articles in Spanish for people who speak Spanish who celebrate this tradition, and I think that's neat. So in the 19th century, this was a regional festival. So we tend to think of things as a monolith where this is a Mexican holiday. And that was not the case in the 19th century. It wasn't until the 20th century, past the revolution in Mexico, where they started to think of themselves as a national entity. And so in the 19th century, you had the states, you had different regions that would celebrate things in their own ways. And you still see that. Like, I mean, even in the US, we're Michiganders, and there's those lists of, you know, you're a Michigander when, and then Wisconsin has them, and New Jersey has them, and so everyone has their own state identity as well, and you really see that carried out in some of these traditions, because, like, this bread that I made, it's different in Oaxaca than it is from the Yucatan and all of these different places. So don't think that this video is going to be telling you definitively how Day of the Dead is celebrated. This is what we found value in that spoke to us. The accounts that I really liked from the 19th century portrayed this festival as a time of joy, actually, which is interesting for a tradition that commemorates death. But there were processions to cemeteries to clean and decorate the graves of the dead. And there were market stalls set up in centralized locations in the city where people would sell sugar skulls, like these little guys. But then also they would have all sorts of animals and figurines also made out of the sugar that they were selling. And they would have toy graves made for little kids. So they would be made of thin planks of wood and be decorated, and like kids could, I don't know, carry them around. I guess that's what kids do, right? That sounds like a kid thing. Mm-hmm. So just stuff that was pertaining to the holiday, almost like a souvenir type of thing. And I thought that was really interesting because this is, you know, a commemoration festival, but it was also a time for celebration. And they would go clean and decorate the graves and hang out there. And one of the main things that carried through as a thread in all of the articles that I found about 19th century celebrations was that there was partying and there was drinking. So that pretty well covers what I learned about the 19th century. It was a time for joy and celebration, and it was almost like commemorating death allowed people to live life to the fullest. And I think that's a pretty healthy response. We could learn a lot from that. So Holly's going to talk about how people have learned from that and how they celebrate today.
Hi, I'm Holly, and I wanted to share with you about this holiday. It's not something that we celebrated as kids in our household. So this is really, for me, experience of learning about my heritage. And I think there's a lot of us who are Mexican Americans or even Mexicans. I think a lot of us are trying to learn about our heritage, and a lot of our heritage was lost through colonization. And so we're doing a lot of trying to learn about that. So thank you for joining us on the journey of learning learning these things. And if you have stuff to add and things that you think would be helpful, we would love to hear from you.
Yeah, I read all my comments. Mm-hmm. So this channel is small enough that I listen to each and every one of you and I don't get overwhelmed. So if you have something to share or if this meant something to you, let us know. That's what we're doing this for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I really started learning about Dia de los Muertos several years ago because I was I work with elementary schoolers, and this was a point in the year when you can talk about Latino history and celebrations and culture. So I really enjoyed learning about it. Today, it's celebrated in much the same way. There's a lot of celebration that happens within the family. So a family will set up an ofrenda, and they will do this leading up to the holiday. So it's not just the couple of days that we call Dia de Muertos. There's also a lot of lead up to it in the tradition, is that you're setting up the ofrenda, and that gives you a chance to talk about your ancestors or the people that you've lost, and to commemorate them, and for your children to learn about them, and to just celebrate them.
So this is called an ofrenda.
Yes.
We're going to explain the stuff on it in a little bit, but essentially it's a little altar almost, but not for worship, for memory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this altar, ours is pretty basic. A lot of ofrendas can have anywhere from 2 to 7 levels of them.
Seven.
7 levels, yeah. So 2 levels represent heaven and earth. 3 levels is heaven, earth, and the underworld. And then the 7 levels represent the journey that your soul takes after death.
That's cool. I did not know that.
Yeah, so I learned a lot of new things. So I learned that there's a lot of things that the ofrenda itself can represent, and that you put pictures of your loved ones on there. You put things that you remember. You put foods that they would have liked to eat, because the idea is that they are celebrating with you.
Yeah.
So your ancestors are still with you.
Yeah, there's this idea that their spirits are coming back during that time of the year. And I don't know if it's like the veil is thinner, or they have it on their spiritual calendar that they're going to go visit you. I don't actually know what the belief is. So the idea is that you're putting stuff out that they liked and that reminds you of them. Oh, and we forgot a couple of things on our ofrenda. You're supposed to put out water because they're journeying, so they're going to be thirsty, and you're supposed to put out salt. I don't know why, but you're supposed to put salt, and we don't have salt. Sorry, ancestors. It's upstairs. I'll get it in the kitchen for you. But yeah, so the idea is, I'm talking over you. The idea is that they're journeying back to visit with you, which in some way is really comforting. Like, they're still around and they want to see you.
Yeah. And there is also still the drinking tradition. This is the mezcal that I got when I was in Mexico. And so I brought that to put on our ofrenda. It doesn't sit very well, so I might.
It's a little shaky.
It should be fine.
Our ofrenda is not
stable,
sturdily constructed.
But yes, so you leave out food, you leave out different beverages that they would like, and that they would want on their journey. Another tradition that I learned about that is celebrated in some places of Mexico is that Dia de Muertos is on November 2nd, and on the 1st, often they will celebrate children that have been lost specifically. So these sugar skulls, a lot of times, if you have children that you have lost, they will will write the name of the child on the skull itself, cool, and put it on the ofrenda in some places.
Well, that's really cool that, like, it doesn't have to be your family. It can be community too. And I think that's really cool that it's a shared thing, because obviously if you lose someone in your family, you mourn them and you talk about them. Well, okay, some people talk about them. Some people don't. No judgment. But to have it be a community thing, I think is really validating. Yeah. And I think that is an aspect of it, is that a lot of the celebration takes place at the graveyard. And so you're there with your community. Everybody's gathering there as well. And in more recent years, they've started to do kind of more of a rather than just gathering at the graveyard as well, they will have parades and things in the street and put on the costumes and that are like the Catrina. This one.
Yep, and paint their faces and things like that.
So, funny story about parades. Apparently, there's a Daniel Craig James Bond film where during like the intro, he chases a bad guy through a Dia de Muertos parade in Mexico City. Well, at the time that was filmed, there was no Dia de Muertos parade in Mexico City. But Mexico City is not stupid, and they were like, hey, we could capitalize on this. So now, there's a Dia de Muertos parade in Mexico City. And I think that's really interesting that, like, Dia de Muertos and this tradition influences popular culture that then circles right back around and influences how people celebrate the holiday.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and speaking of popular culture references, one of my favorite movies, and movies that makes me cry every single time.
I still haven't watched it because of that.
Exactly. Is the movie Coco. And that movie came to be as this tradition became more popularized and more well known in the U.S. And so I think a lot of people have a strong interest in it now. And I think that, the movie Coco, they did a really good job of being really respectful of the holiday and respectful of Mexican culture. And I know that I started crying right at the beginning when they panned over a small Mexican village, and I was like, oh, it's just like where my dad grew up.
Yeah,
so
right? Oh, no. And then, right in the fields.
Yeah, and then, of course, spoilers if you haven't seen it, the whole movie revolves around remembering your ancestors and remembering and one of the characters in the movie is the great grandma Coco, and her memory as well. And so that touched a lot on how our grandmother had Alzheimer's and went through a long decline where, well, this time she knew who we were, this next time she didn't know who we were, and all of those things. And so it really touches on a lot of things that have to do with memory and have to do with remembrance of the people that you've lost, and your relationship to your ancestors and to your elders.
Yep.
And so it's been really touching, and with having lost 3 grandparents in the last year and a half.
Yeah. Like,
of our
boom,
lives.
boom, boom.
No matter how old you are, it never gets easier.
Nope.
It's still loss and it's still grief. But
Yeah, and we lost both of our grandpas this year.
Mm-hmm.
And because of COVID, we haven't, like, we had an outdoor memorial for one of them, but we haven't had, like, an actual funeral for Grandpa Jacobs.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't had that moment of closure. So to find out that there's a whole, like, festival about this was like, well, hot dang.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and so I think that there's times in our lives when we really need traditions, these traditions, and so I'm glad that you brought this up to me and asked me to be a part of this, because this tradition is really important right now in this season, and I'm glad that it's a part of our heritage and something that we can learn about.
Yeah, I started reading about it and I started crying because I was like, this hits all of what I'm feeling right now. We're lacking connection, we're lacking community, we lost our grandparents, we're exploring our culture as Mexican Americans who were not raised in it. It's all of that across the board, and I thought that was really timely. Like, all of a sudden it was like, oh, this just fell in my lap and I need to do something about it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So this is our little ofrenda, and I think it's time to talk about the stuff that we have on it. I'm going to talk about this first because I'm very proud of it. This is my Bread of the Dead, or my Pan de Muerto, which I actually just published at the time that we're filming this. I published a video on me making it. And so these little doohickeys here represent bones, and the circle represents the memory of the dead, I think it was. I'll put a correction in the description if that's wrong, but the circular form has meaning, and the decorations have meaning, and that's one of the traditional things that you would put on any ofrenda.
Some of the things that I brought to be on the ofrenda, as we said, we lost 3 of our grandparents in the last year and a half.
And so the 4th grandparent also has passed away, but that was like 7 years ago. So Grandma Tuttle, my mom's mom, died 7 years ago, and that was really hard. That was like right after your wedding.
It was during my honeymoon.
Yeah, so that was real shit. It was not a good time, but she was a huge part of our growing up. She was a kindergarten teacher. She was a lot like you, and it's really, like, I think one of the biggest shames about it all is that we didn't have a chance for, like, to see you two get to know each other as adults.
Yeah, we shared a lot of things, and so I do miss her a lot, and I think that there's a lot that we would have had to talk about had we been able to have an adult relationship. So I am sad about that. That is very sad. But I also, I celebrate her and what she gave me as far as
you work with
that
kids.
I pursued.
Yeah. And that was where I ended up with Grandpa Tuttle, my mom's dad. When they were saying, do you want this from his estate? Do you want that from the house? Blah, blah, blah. I was like, what he gave me isn't an object. I'm in living history because of Grandpa. He took his family up to the Mackinac Straits every year, and that inspired our parents to take us up to the Mackinac Straits every year, which ended up with us going to a historic site, which I decided when I was 8 that I wanted to work at, and then I did, and now here I am doing living history. So what I have from him is intangible in some ways, but very tangible in other ways.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of what you have from Grandma is the career that you're in and the passion that you have for working with children, because she really liked being a Grammy.
Mm-hmm.
She really liked being a Grammy to little kids, and that I'll always love and appreciate and remember that about her.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, as long as we're on the subject of the Tuttles, would you like to?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I'm covering the things that remind me of my mom's parents because I was pretty close with them, and Holly was closer with my dad's parents, so we kind of divided it up that way. And so one of the things that we called my grandpa was Grandpa Fudge. When we were real little, they were Grammy and Grandpa Fudge because apparently Grandpa liked to make fudge. And so last night I was like, you know what? We need fudge on the ofrenda. And I made some extremely subpar fudge because Grandpa did not teach me to make fudge. Pinterest taught me to make fudge. And
poorly, apparently.
Yes. Well, okay, so I think what happened is I overmixed it because last time I tried to make fudge, I undermixed it and it was gritty. So this time I was like, I have a hand mixer and went ham on it. And so it's kind of more brittle than it should be.
Still chocolate.
I mean, Pinterest said you can melt it down and like try again, but I wasn't going to do that at 11 o'clock at night. But yeah, it tastes like chocolate.
Tastes great.
It's just a little stiffer than you would want for actual fudge.
Thank you, Grandpa Fudge.
Thank you, Grandpa Fudge. And then in our adorable skull candy dish that turned out to be like twice as big as we thought, I have Werther's because Grandma always carried Werther's around in her purse. And I don't know if it was for like food bribery, like shut up kids, have a candy or whatever, but I very like viscerally associate Werther's with their house. So those are my things to commemorate Grandma and Grandpa Fudge, which is what we called them. And then I also have this little skeleton kitty. The sugar skulls are called calaveras. So this is a kitty calavera. And a couple of years ago, we had a cat that we had raised from a kitten that desperately wanted to be an outdoor cat. So we were kind of letting her be outdoor, indoor, and it worked fine for a while. But then we live in a touristy area and the roads got busy and we called her to come in one night and she would not come in. And then the next morning I found her hit by a car. And it was really traumatic and horrible, and it took me like a year before I could talk about it. But this is a little calavera to represent Tiny Kitty. I call her Tiny Kitty even though she weighed 11 pounds.
Tiny.
Yeah, she was not tiny. She was tiny when she was a kitten.
Yes.
She was also a tornado. So I miss her, but I'm not sure she would have been super happy as an indoor cat. So at least she died doing what she loved. She was out adventuring, and I was the one that found her. She was not like destroyed in any way. She just got hit and was gone. So this is my Tiny Kitty Calavera. And she's going to go on the ofrenda because we still love her and miss her. And we now have 4 cats in her memory. So there's probably cat hair on this ofrenda in her memory as well.
Perfect. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our grandparents on our dad's side.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the grandparents that adopted our dad and lived in Mexico for 40 years. So
40 years, damn.
40 years, yep. So our dad grew up in Mexico, living with an American or a U.S. family living in Mexico. So it's a bit of a complicated heritage.
Yeah, it's a third culture heritage. It's not, we're not just Mexican. We're also Mexican, MK, U.S. expat. It's all sorts of stuff.
It's all kinds of things. But yeah, so we learned a lot from them about Mexico. Growing up, we lived in a very white community. We didn't have any other...
We still live in a very white community.
Well, you do.
It's Dutch people. They're so white.
That's true. The Dutch people are still in charge, even in Grand Rapids, in my diverse community. So
yes.
That's the whole thing. Anyway, so
Moving on.
We grew up in a very white community, and so we had our heritage that we learned about at home through stories that our dad told and stories that our grandparents told. But the internet wasn't really a thing until
like high school?
2000s.
Yeah.
So we didn't really...
I mean, we got internet early because Dad's always on the cutting edge of technology, but that was still like 1999.
Right, but I mean, people didn't put things on the internet.
Right, yeah. I was on the Beanie Babies cyberboard.
Cute.
Mom and Dad thought it was safe.
Yeah.
It was. It was just the other stuff that was sketchy.
Right. So anyway, we didn't have the internet the way that we have the internet now, so we were learning through the stories of our
Oral
grandparents.
tradition.
Yeah, through the oral tradition of our grandparents and our dad. So one of the things that was really valuable to me was that my grandma taught me how to make some traditional Mexican dishes. And this will probably to any Mexican will sound ridiculous, but I have a little bowl of beans, of dried black beans here, because my grandma taught me how to make beans from, refried beans from scratch. And that is just the most normal thing to eat in Mexico. Everybody eats beans every day. But for me, that was important to learn because it was such a part of my heritage.
Well, and we didn't eat beans. Mom doesn't like beans, so we didn't eat beans.
Right.
You
So
know?
it was in high school that I asked my grandma to teach me how to make Mexican food. And my dad didn't know how to make it. He knew what was good and where to find it, but he didn't know how to make it.
Right.
So my dad and I specifically asked my grandma to teach us how to make a lot of traditional Mexican foods. And so she taught us how to make beans from scratch. I usually buy them in a can now.
Yeah, do you remember how excited Mom and Dad were when they started selling canned refried black beans?
Yeah.
Like, that was a big deal because
was.
that was a very iconic, like, home comfort food for Dad that was a pain in the ass to make because you gotta soak the beans overnight and blah, blah, blah.
You have to have a pressure cooker, and you have to, and pressure cookers, you know, if you have
Now
to know
you
how
have
to work one.
now you have instant pots. Back then you had a tin pot with a knob on top. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was
Yeah.
a big deal.
It was a big deal. And so, and we just didn't have a lot of access to traditional foods in the communities that we were in without just going out to eat. So we really enjoyed, I really enjoyed my grandma teaching me how to make beans from scratch and how to make tortillas from scratch. And
I should have brought the pencil down. Our grandpa made us, my grandpa Jacobs, our dad's dad, was a carpenter, and he made us each a tortilla press.
Yep.
So we still have those, and we still use them.
yeah.
It's huge, so it wouldn't fit on here, but
Yeah, so for a lot of years, Grandma and Grandpa Jacobs were our gateway to our heritage.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, even though they are not, their heritage is not Mexican. They just lived there.
Yeah.
Our dad's
but they lived there
heritage
for
is Mexican.
40 years.
Yeah,
Like, I didn't
so-
know it was that long. So yeah.
And so they were our gateway until we went to Mexico, which didn't happen until I was in grade school.
Yeah.
And so this also reminds me of my grandparents on that side because we stayed. Well, we didn't stay with them, but we stayed.
They had a little apartment, and we had a hotel close by.
So we hung out with them while we were in Mexico quite a lot, and our grandma helped us buy these rebosos, which are traditional Mexican
It's a shawl.
shawls.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and at that point, neither of us spoke Spanish. So I was in, like, maybe 7th grade, and you were in, like, 4th?
Third, yeah.
3rd? Yeah, so we were real little. And so Grandma would take us around and speak Spanish for us. And it was, in hindsight, probably pretty weird for the people in the markets because we looked like pale but Mexican children. And here was this German old lady talking in Spanish. And we weren't.
Yep.
And I remember our relatives all thought we were crazy because we had a big get-together with my dad's half-siblings and some cousins and stuff. And they all had tamales, which is like a festival food. Like, they're hard to make. They take a long time. So that was like A+, we're getting the good food. And Holly and I were like, can we have peanut butter sandwiches?
Yep. They all thought we were crazy.
And now we'd be like, hey, tamales.
Yeah. Now there's no way you get to eat peanut butter in Mexico.
Hell no. Well, and I remember asking my dad, I was like, how do you say excuse me? Because there were so many people in this little apartment, and I was like trying to squeeze by them, so I actually went and asked him, how do you say excuse me in Spanish, because I feel like I'm being rude. And I was like young, so good job, past Katie, way to be polite. But that's a big standout memory for me, was how do you say excuse me? I keep running into people.
Yep. Yeah, and that was our first experience in Mexico, and we shared it with our grandparents and with our dad. And for me, it opened up a lot of doors for me in understanding who I was and my heritage. And
Yeah, it was life-changing.
It was one of the first places where I felt comfortable fully as who I was. So this holds a lot of meaning for me, and sharing that with my grandparents.
Yeah,
holds
and
a lot of
we each have a couple of rebozos that, well, you have like 5.
Yeah.
I have a couple, but that one, that we got on that first trip is like, that's the original rebozo.
Yep. Yes. So those are my memories.
So I think that's pretty much for our memories. Did want to talk about this for a minute because this is Rich's guitar. And when his grandma died on his mom's side, she left him a little inheritance. And when he moved over here to the US, he had to sell all his musical instruments because we had 3 big suitcases and that was it. That was all we could afford to move. And so he had to sell a couple of guitars and a keyboard and some sound stuff and just a lot of things that kind of defined who he was to him. And that was a big deal. And so when his grandma died and left him an inheritance, she was one of the ones that really encouraged him to get into music. And so this guitar was bought kind of in her memory with the inheritance that she left him, and he wanted to contribute this to the ofrenda, but he didn't want to be on camera. So I told him that he could definitely put it in there, and I thought that was a very sweet memory, but he didn't want to have to talk about it, so I would. So this is from Rich's grandma. These are our grandparents, and I'm sure that there are others that we have lost and that you have lost that you need to talk about. And I think that in terms of cultural appreciation, that's one of the best ways that you can do it. When I told some of my friends that I was going to do this video, they asked me, how do you differentiate between cultural appropriation and appreciation in something like this? And I said, well, I think this is the ultimate type of appreciation where you're finding personal value in the tradition and you're doing it respectfully because it's the people that you loved or even the pets that you loved. I saw some really cute ofrendas that had like dog collars and treats, and people love their pets, people love their family. And I think if you can use some of these traditions and the ideas behind them to find connection and healing, that's the ultimate type of appreciation. It's not appropriation because you're doing it respectfully and you're finding spiritual and emotional value in it, and you're not doing it just to perform sugar skull magic or something like that. You're connecting with yourself and your family and the people that you loved.
And you're not profiting off of it either.
No.
I think that's a huge part of cultural appropriation. Is a lot of as Dia de Muertos has gotten more popularized in the U.S., there has been a lot of companies that have kind of capitalized on it, and you could definitely argue that that's appropriation. But and I think for us in particular, this is our heritage, and it is important to us. And I think a lot of Mexican Americans and whatever your heritage is, there's been an encouragement to suppress our culture in order to what's that called? Assimilate.
Yep.
And so a lot of us are doing a work to relearn our culture as adults that was downplayed for us as children.
Yeah, and it wasn't done in bad faith. Like,
No,
our parents
not at
did
all.
the best they could with what they had, but
Well, we weren't in a community.
yeah,
that
we weren't
celebrated it. So
we
it
weren't in a
didn't-
Hispanic community. We weren't available, or we weren't in a Hispanic community. The internet wasn't a thing, so unless you lived in it, where are you gonna find your information? Like,
Yeah.
you do the best you can with what you've got.
Right, and so I think that if you are somebody who is learning your own culture and your own history, I think that some of us do feel that tension between appropriation and appreciation. But what I believe is that there are so many more of us than we admit or talk about that are in that space of needing to go back and learn our heritage.
Yeah.
And that is genuine, and that is important, and you should not feel ashamed of that at all.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. And I think even, like, I mean, we're half white. If you're a white person and you need healing and connection and a space to grieve and remember and connect with your ancestors and celebrate their lives, that's got value too. So if you're uncomfortable with it, you can come hang out with us and you can put your bowl of beans on the ofrenda and we'll talk about your loved ones too. Thanks, everybody. Adios. Thank you so much for watching. You can find me on Facebook at Latina Living History, on Instagram at La Vida Josefina, and on Patreon, also at Latina Living History. Adios, amigos!